three hosts. You have myself, Tim. Hello. You have Lachlan.
Howdy.
And Ruben.
Hello.
So, exciting times. We've chosen our next book to read. Up on camera, you'll see I'm holding up the book. And it says The Complete Works of Epictetus, Discourses, the Enchiridion, or however the hell we say that. I've actually heard different ways of saying that. And Fragments. Only problem is it doesn't contain those things. So we all bought the book at the same time. It all got delivered at the same day. And the contents numbers don't align with the page numbers. And the content within the book, it's completely missing the Enchiridion. How are you guys saying that word, by the way?
Probably incorrectly, but I was saying Enchiridion, but it probably is K, because in Greek it would be a K. So you're probably right, Tim.
Enchiridion?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Ruben? How do you say that?
I like the CH sound, but I think Lachlan's probably right.
There you
go. I think we're going to have to go with a K.
I might ask, I know a few guys that have gone to Bible college who have read the old Greek. I might ask them how that should be said.
Oh, yeah, good call.
So anyway, we all like a real physical book, but to proceed for this podcast, we're all working off a Kindle edition that costs $1 that we will link in the description of this video, and we will also put it on our Facebook page. For those of you who aren't a member, look for us on Facebook. You'll find us pretty easily. There's a couple of hundred of us on there now, and it's a cool little space, so just put some ideas up.
We should point out that the funny thing we worked out with that copy of the book was something we didn't realize was something that happens in this modern age, but it was print to order. So it was printed by Amazon locally in Sydney, apparently off another Kindle edition. And we put the order in there, it made the book for us, but it was obviously missing a few sections. And I think maybe the pages, when they got scaled, it kind of wrecked up the page formatting of the contents page. So interesting trick for young players out there.
I think it's actually a really cool idea. I'm in favour of it, but I just think maybe they need some quality control.
Totally.
Yeah, I agree. It is a cool idea.
I don't know what it would cost them to get someone to go through a 500-page book before sending it out, but I suppose they can at least check the page numbers.
Well, maybe we can offer our services.
For whatever titles we choose to do for our upcoming episodes, we will do quality control. Yeah,
exactly. So, speaking of upcoming titles, it was my birthday in the week just gone, and I got some books for myself. So, besides the book that we got, that's the wrong book. So firstly, I graduated from a course last year, a leadership course, and they sent me in the mail for completing the course a book called If I Could Tell You Just One Thing. And it's encounters with remarkable people and their most valuable advice. And yeah, it's got some people in there like the Dalai Lama and Richard Branson and David Attenborough, Tony Blair, Stephen Fry, lots of different people just with little short thoughts. So that's on my list to read. That was a free book, so that's pretty cool. But exciting things, more exciting things. So Ruben and his family got me these two books. So Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov. Is that the right way of saying that? Karamazov?
Oh, yeah. Don't go to me from pronunciation. That sounds good to me.
So that was awesome.
I chose those two. I chose those two for Timmy because he's a big Jordan Peterson fan, and I've heard Mr. Peterson reference those books quite frequently. So I thought I'd get him a copy.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And then for myself, I went on a little bit of a spending splurge, and ended up getting myself these 6 books. They're the classic edition from Capstone. I already had one for meditations. So I've got the Art of War, Tao Te Ching, the Communist Manifesto, Beyond Good and Evil, The Prince, and Letters from a Stoic, which I'm hoping that we can do some of that book on the podcast in the future.
Well, funny enough, that was that Capstone series that I wound up buying a copy of The Republic for as well. So, so maybe I should get the same for Letters from a Stoic and Meditations, and we'll have the same copies that way.
Nice little matching set.
Yeah,
they're a nice feeling book. They feel a bit leathery, but it's what, A5 in size, the page size?
Something like that,
yeah.
And
Nice.
if by some amazing cosmic fluke, if Capstone Publishing has listened to this podcast, we're happy to take you on as a sponsor if you want to send it.
Well, those of you watching would have just observed a few of us have a drink. So, in our normal tradition, what are we drinking tonight? I'll begin. I am drinking one of my all-time favourites, which is the Suntory whiskey Toki, which is a reasonably priced Japanese whiskey, which is kind of like saying a reasonably priced Ferrari, but it's still, for Japanese whiskey, it's reasonably priced, and it's quite nice. What are you drinking there, Lachlan?
I'm back on the G&Ts. I'm having the Aiki, which is the Japanese gin. It's actually the very the last shot of it. So yeah, rather enjoying that. It's a good bottle.
Nice. And how about you, Ruben? What are you drinking?
I've got an ale tonight. I got a Furphy.
It's a solid choice. The Furphy. It's a good.
You've been leaving him at his front door again, have you, Tim?
No, this time I didn't get these
I bought
ones.
this six-pack. I try not to bang on about the price, but I got them on special for $14 a six-pack, and then when I used my Flybuys card, it went down to $12. That was pretty fun.
For a bargain.
$2 an ale. That is a good price. That's cheaper than Coke.
Yep.
Very good. All right, well, just for those of you watching and listening, but we're trying something different for this book. So some feedback I received and also just perceived from our last season is, if you're not reading the book that we're discussing or you haven't read it before, then some of the things we talk about might be at times difficult to follow. So what we're doing this time is recording each part that we're discussing. The structure of this book actually lends itself really well to it, because they're basically, sometimes just 2 or 3 sentences long, other times maybe a page and a half. Kind of similar to if you open a Bible and you've got chapters without verses. It'd be like that. So I'm going to insert the reading for each section in post-edit. So then hopefully you as the listener/viewer, it's easier to follow what we're talking about and to understand. And if you haven't had the time to read it and you're driving in your car or mowing the lawns or doing whatever you do when you listen to us, then at least you'll understand what we're talking about, hopefully. And hopefully as I read it, I don't mispronounce too many things and don't make too many mistakes, because I'm certainly not a professional voice recorder for Audible or anything like that, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, anyway, so we'll get started. So Lachlan, I believe you have prepared a brief introduction for Epictetus.
Yeah, I just thought before I started reading, I just wanted to know a little bit about the guy, and then a little bit about the book. So I just made a few notes. It's all pretty simple, so I'll just jump on that. So,
cool.
So he was born in AD 50 in what was modern day Turkey, and somehow he ended up being a slave in Rome as a young man. He's noted as having a wealthy master who was secretary to Emperor Nero. And for some reason, even though he's a slave, he was allowed to study philosophy. along the way, he became quite knowledgeable in it, and that managed to sort of raise his status. I'm not sure if that led to, but eventually he did wind up gaining his freedom. And that happened at some time after the death of Nero. And around the age of 30, he started to teach philosophy in Rome. When he was around 43, so he'd been sort of practicing, I suppose, that for 13 years, he moved to Greece because there was a new Roman emperor, or maybe he'd been in the seat for a little bit of time, Domitian, and he banned philosophers from the city. I didn't know too much about that emperor, so I went on my usual sort of digression there. He's an interesting cat, autocrat, possibly a tyrant, who sought to control public and private morals, and was trying to reduce the power of the Senate. So I am the Senate, in the words of Star Wars. So anyway, he'd be interesting to dig a bit further in, but I had to come back to the story. Anyway, so he continued to practice philosophy when he got to Greece, and he started a school to teach it. And this is where he gained his most famous pupil, a guy by the name of Arrian. And it's Arrian who is credited with writing the discourses of Epictetus, which are basically the written down lectures of Epictetus. And that was in circa 108 AD. So basically, it's noted that I wrote down some little quote that someone had made a note. Whatever I heard him say, I used to write down word for word as best I could, endeavoring to preserve it as a memorial for my own future use of his way of thinking and the frankness of his speech. So that was the words of Arrian. So the modern version of discourses is actually incomplete. And so, funnily enough, the book that we got, it's got 4 books in it. And that's the 4 surviving books of discourses, and I think there may have been sort of 8 or something like that. In any case, Epictetus died at a ripe old age of 85 in AD 135. It was a pretty solid age for that time. I don't know how many people used to live to 85, but it seems like he had a good innings. And I should add that, like Socrates, he lived a really simple life with minimal possessions and sort of avoided the trappings of wealth, even though he sort of became somewhat sort of famous, I guess. So that's really about him. I guess whilst it might sort of sound a bit funny that this Arrian is the guy who's actually written down, this guy's writings, it's actually kind of similar to Plato, writing down, the discussions of Socrates. So I suppose like Stoics were regarded as kind of doers, so they didn't necessarily stop to write everything down. So that's just how that went. So the book we're actually doing, though, is the Enchiridion. So this book was also compiled by the student Arrian, and this is what he considers to be the most necessary or useful information, I suppose, to be able to live their lives. So around half the material in the book comes from the 4 books of discourses, and the other half's assumed to come from the lost books of discourses, but obviously we don't know. So this guidebook, it's a way, or a guide to how to live your life. It might be considered in a modern age a little bit extreme in the way that you're separating enjoyment or emotion and things from stuff, but I guess we'll find out as we sort of read through the book. But it's considered to be mandatory reading for the understanding of Stoicism, and I think we're here for the journey. I should just say, I'll pretty much wrap it up there, but the meaning of Enchiridion, it's an adjective to describe the book. So it literally means that it's in the hand or ready to hand. So effectively, a handbook. So this is Epictetus' handbook for life, and that's why it's called that. It's also used as a description of a dagger that's kept close to hand. And I know this book was a popular one of Marcus Aurelius's, so maybe he appreciated the double meaning to Enchiridion as well. So that's probably enough preface to sort of get going with, but that's the bit of digging I did.
That's awesome, mate. Really solid introduction.
It's all good.
Yeah, thanks for that, man. That was really good. I did a little bit, nowhere near as much as me. My only takeaway was that apparently he had a bung leg for his whole life.
He did. And there's a bit of, I suppose, conflicting stories about whether he was born with it or his master broke his leg. So there seems to be two
there's a
different
sort
accounts.
of story about that.
Yeah, for sure.
All right then. Well, let's fire up our Kindle edition, so we have it at hand, so to speak, and let's get underway. So, part one. Part 1. Of all existing things, some are in our power, and others are not in our power. In our power are thought, impulse, will to get, and will to avoid, and, in a word, everything which is our own doing. Things not in our power include the body, property, reputation, office, and, in a word, everything which is not our own doing. Things in our power are by nature free, unhindered, untrammelled. Things not in our power are weak, servile, subject to hindrance, dependent on others. Remember then that if you imagine that what is naturally slavish is free, and what is naturally another's is your own, you will be hampered, you will mourn, you will be put to confusion, you will blame gods and men. But if you think that only yours belongs to you, and that what is another is indeed another's, no one will ever put compulsion or hindrance on you. You will blame none. You will accuse none. You will do nothing against your will. No one will harm you. You will have no enemy, for no harm can touch you. Aiming then at these high matters, you must remember that to attain them requires more than ordinary effort. You'll have to give up some things entirely, and put off others for the moment. And if you would have these also, office and wealth, it may be that you will fail to get them, just because your desire is set on the former, and you will certainly fail to attain those things which alone bring freedom and happiness. Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." Then test it by those rules that you possess, and first by this, the chief test of all. Is it concerned with what is in our power, or with what is not in our power? And if it is concerned with what is not in our power, be ready with the answer that it is nothing to you. Oops, hang on. So for those of you listening, my Kindle is a Gen 1 iPad mini. That's what I use as my Kindle. So it runs a little bit slow. It's not made out of stone, but it's close.
It's the stone tablet edition. Yeah.
Okay. So we won't read it. Obviously, I'll do that post-edit. So what were your guys, when you first started reading this, was it what you expected after reading Republic and having that sort of story mode, for lack of a better term, going into sort of these short, sharp statements? Yeah, what did you think?
I was, I suppose, only expecting it from having done the research side of things before I started reading. And so the fact that they'd called it like a handbook for, I suppose, lessons or way to sort of live a Stoic life or what have you, it didn't sort of surprise me too much. But I must admit, the first time I opened up the pages and saw, a fairly sparsely populated page with a paragraph on every second page or something like that, it's different in the sense that it doesn't have the story there. But I suppose if you do want the story, probably getting into discourses will give you the broader story around something, and this is just going to give you the key learning from it, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. Is that your thoughts as well, Ruben? Is that sort of ring true for you?
No, similarly, yeah, it's a lot more distilled. I did find myself asking the question whenever it makes an assertion, what's that based on? because that's the whole thing about the Republic. They get to their conclusions in a really roundabout way, but you see all the steps as to how they come to that conclusion. So you don't get that in this. I would assume, as Lachlan pointed out, that would be more. If you wanted that, you have to go to the discourses. So I did find myself questioning quite often when he made an assertion. I like that, I understand that, but I wonder what that's based on.
Yeah. I've heard it described that Stoicism is philosophy with done practically. It's like, I don't know how another way to say that. It's not coming to my tongue, but it's kind of like tradies philosophy. Like it's a philosophy that you put into action, and the way it's taught is very much in such a way that you can use it immediately.
Yeah, I tried to read it, and intentionally so, and I don't know whether this is a good way or a bad way, but that's what I decided to do. I intentionally tried to read it through a Platonic lens, like through having just read the Republic. I tried to kind of apply what I read in the Republic to this, to try and fill in the gaps. I don't know whether that works or not, but it'll be interesting as we go through it to point those bits out.
I think that's for sure the way that it's intended to be written. And just from that little bit of digging that I did, this guy is definitely a fan of Plato and Socrates. And in fact, he references them at different points in time as well. So I think that's a really solid way to do it. And to be honest, I was doing very much the same sort of thing. Because I have to say, when you do read these, like you were saying, Rubes, I think you don't necessarily get all of the context around things. And I guess I'm trying to sort of backfill some of the gaps a little bit with, knowledge from the Republic and that kind of era and that kind of thinking. Just knowing that the author was sort of thinking that way as well, if you know what I mean.
Well, how much time elapsed between Plato and this bloke?
Be about 550 years, wouldn't it? Maybe almost 600 years.
Yeah, because it was something like 500 years before Christ, right?
So if he was born about 50 AD, it'd be between 550 and 600.
Yeah, right.
So it's interesting you guys read it that way. I didn't even think of reading it that way. I kind of just look at it as like, are these sayings things that are helpful for me personally, and do they apply?
Okay.
Kind of like I don't know. Like sometimes you watch those YouTube motivational videos. Have you ever watched any of them? They're like sayings and things, and so I look at it like that, and so obviously if they make mention of looking at a boy or slaves or that sort of stuff, I straight away go, oh, that's in reference to context of XYZ, etc., etc. It's not a thing at the moment, but I still think, okay, does that make sense for me to apply that? So it's good that we've got different sort of glasses on as we look at this.
For sure.
Okay, so this first one is talking about what's in our power and what's not in our power. It's talking about so let's talk about things that are not in our power. So it says things that are not in our power are things like the body, property, reputation, office, and everything which isn't our own doing.
Yeah.
I read that and I think that's pretty good. It's a good description of what's not in our power.
I guess I read this as sort of, and I suppose this one too it's a bit of a longer passage than on some of the pages that follow, if you know what I mean. And so I almost sort of saw it like them trying to sort of set the tone in a way for what you're about to read in this manual. So it's almost like I'm going to give you a bit of a flavor for what you're about to encounter sort of as you're going further through here, and just trying to set the mindset around, think about what you can control, what you can't control, and trying to separate those issues in your mind to prioritize the stuff you can influence, I suppose.
Yeah, you're right. And I think knowing that he was a slave for such a long time, it's interesting he's starting straight away with those things that he would have had no control over when he was a slave.
No, good point.
So,
yeah, it's interesting, I think, when he sort of talks about the stuff that's outside of your control as well. It's I guess I was just trying to understand, like, obviously you can't influence them, but I think he's trying to point out, it's going to just sort of like lead to, frustration or something like that. And then maybe, frustration is going to lead to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to the dark side, right? So I suppose with a lot of this stuff that I've been reading, I've been applying that sort of thought, that Platonic thought of virtue as an undercurrent in a lot of this stuff too.
yeah.
And I think it's
Yeah,
just,
well, he sort of...
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I was going to say, after he sort of lists right at the start, he lists as things that are not free, things that are not under your control. He pretty much comes out with it. He just says, if you imagine that what is naturally slavish is free, so if you imagine what is free is if you imagine something that is not free is free, or if you and what is naturally another's is your own, that you're going to be hampered, you're going to be upset, you're going to be confused. So that's kind of the crux. Like I guess that's what you get when you get a distilled thing. But I did appreciate that he comes out and basically says this is the crux of the matter. That if you don't understand what is yours and what is not yours, and what you can control and what you can't control, you're going to have some problems.
Amen.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that the yours and not yours stuff as well. And
ownership,
talking about ownership and and I suppose like jealousy and lust or whatever else it may well sort of be. And they're obviously just, bad influences on your life, right? If you're just going to be sort of focused on what everyone else has and what you want, but you can't obtain. I mean, it's just going to give you bad juju. So,
well, that's what struck me too. That's what struck me too, is that he talks about it in terms of ownership, which I don't know whether I've sort of seen it discussed that way before. But when he's talking about things that you can and can't control, about the way you think, and the way that other people think, and what other people do, he demarks them and describes it as having ownership or not having ownership. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that kind of thinking does come from being a slave, because as a slave he was owned. In those days, it was considered to be owned, which is a bit foreign to us these days.
Yeah, true. But look, it's interesting too, just with understanding his life as well, that he maintained a modest life even when he became a free man, and did have access, I suppose, to wealth and possessions and things like that. And he's actually sort of chosen a Socratic sort of style of simple life. I don't know,
straight out of Plato, isn't it? That was
totally.
That was the Socratic life.
Yeah, and I won't really wonder if that was a strict choice. You can sort of tell he's a bit of a fan of Plato and Socrates, and I think that was a very conscious decision not to burden himself with the pursuit of things, and to instead focus on what's important. So,
but it's
true. I think he's
yeah, you're right. But it's true outside of slavery too. So
sure.
when I read this stuff, I think about debt trap, or people being really, really stressed about work because, at work, if I don't keep the boss happy, I'll lose my job, which then means I can't pay for my sick car or my house or whatever. So those possessions sort of make you a slave to that person that has the power to give or take away from you. So yeah. The other thing I like about this is it introduces the idea of the impression, which I've looked into before when I've read about Stoicism. It's a very like psychology sort of feel that the event happens and it's not the event that harms us, but it's our impression of it. It's sort of dipping the toe into that idea. And he straight away gives the solution to it as well, or his solution. So, have you guys come across that idea of an impression before?
Not that explicitly, but just from life experience, I know because I've seen it that two people can experience the same event and be affected very, very differently. So that's what I thought of when he started talking about impressions. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, because you can have two people go through or share an experience and have it be really detrimental to one and then hardly seem to affect another.
I must admit, when I heard the word impression and I started reading some of this thing, the first thing that popped to mind again was the shadows on the wall of the cave in the cave analogy, and that the impressions are like the shadows on the wall, where they're sort of interpreting them as they sort of see them come past.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
All right, I didn't go there at all. That's good. Yeah.
Do you think it's the
he
same,
talked about,
or do you
not
think
having
it's different?
I suppose like there's a little bit of a different angle that he took on this particular passage, though. He's talking about, the impression like of someone, though, right? So it's kind of like maybe jumping to like maybe an irrational conclusion about someone based on their behavior or something. I don't know if I was quite reading that bit right. He's almost sort of like warning you not to jump into like an emotional conclusion and get all worked up about something. Take a moment to...
I'll read that a little bit. He's saying, make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, you are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be. Then test it by those rules that you possess. What those rules are, I don't know. And first by this, the chief test of all, is it concerned with what is in our power or with what is not in our power? And if it is concerned with what is not in our power, be ready with the answer that it is nothing to you. So yeah, I'm interested to find out what those tools are. The rules that we possess.
Yeah.
Well, I just liked the way that he basically described having an argument with yourself, almost like be ready to say you are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be. Like, to me, that just almost sounded almost like a play, like like a dude. What's that? Who's that famous playwright? Macbeth and all that. Shakespeare. It's almost very Shakespearean. This the whole Shakespearean monologue where the dude's like almost talking to his own feelings or impression of something. So I quite like that bit.
Yes. I actually said the same thing to my wife today when I was talking about this, that it felt Shakespearean at times. It's funny that you picked that up.
Yeah, righto.
Yeah.
I think it's also due to the time this particular copy was translated as well.
Oh, okay.
So I think different translations will have some different use of language and all that sort of thing. So,
oh yeah,
sure.
This was the flowery version that Ruben prefers. So,
all right. Well, let's.
No. It reminded me of it. It reminded because I watched Macbeth recently and read it and listened to it a few times. And it's got a bunch of monologues in it where they're kind of going through, what life means and stuff like that. And it just reminded me of that for some reason. Not so much the language was an issue, but not even just the language. It's just the idea of almost arguing with yourself or trying to convince yourself or something.
Okay. Well, are we happy with that for point 1 or part 1?
Sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the ideas will flow in other parts, and so if we've not adequately explained something, we'll have other opportunities to do so.
Hold on. I did just
yep,
thought. Did you mention then test it by those rules that you possess? But you're saying you're not sure what those rules are. But is the first rule basically, and first by this, the chief test is it concerned with what is in our power or what is not in our power? So he's like saying that's your first rule. Your first rule is to ask that question.
Yeah, that's what.
So we've got one rule.
Yeah. So I think we've got, like, if you're looking at this as like a flowchart, which is not a spreadsheet, by the way, but like a flowchart, that it's got like, is this in your control? No. Straight to final answer. But then if there's a yes, I think there's a sequence of other questions that you need to ask about the event, which haven't yet been disclosed. Okay, let's go on to part 2. Part 2. Remember that the will to get promises attainment of what you will, and the will to avoid promises escape from what you avoid. And he who fails to get what he wills is unfortunate, and he who does not escape what he wills to avoid is miserable. If then you try to avoid only what is unnatural in the region within your control, you will escape from all that you avoid. But if you try to avoid disease or death or poverty, you will be miserable. Therefore, let your will to avoid have no concern with what is not in man's power. Direct it only to things in man's power that are contrary to nature. But for the moment, you must utterly remove the will to get. For if you will to get something not in man's power, you are bound to be unfortunate, while none of the things in man's power that you could honourably will to get is yet within your reach. Impulse to act and not to act, these are your concern, yet exercise them gently and without strain and provisionally. And all right, so part 2. So this is talking about the will. So to get promises, to avoid promises.
Sorry, mate, I don't mean to interrupt, but did you make a timestamp of when you went into part 2 for editing purposes?
I didn't, but thank you. I will do that.
You're going to need it.
Continue.
Yeah, I found this really interesting. I guess, like, particularly as he's talking about the will to avoid, because it seemed like a really interesting concept that seemed different to maybe some of the stuff that we'd been looking at with Plato and whatnot. Because it's almost like avoiding feels like running away from or something, and I don't know, it doesn't feel sort of chivalrous or
courageous.
Yeah. So it just sounded funny that seemed to be like one of the core sort of parts here is, if there's stuff you want to avoid, whether it's, things, people, circumstances, stuff that you don't want to experience or have, like, that's okay. And so that just sort of felt a little jarring to me, I must say.
So is he saying, like, if you've got a drama queen nearby, you don't have to play that game? Like, just disengage?
Look, it's probably in capturing things like that as well. And, there's those, things people always sort of say, if you have people around you who don't support you and don't value you, if they're just putting you down, like, why be around those kind of people? And so it may well be things like that, and that's what you maybe have the will to avoid, is people that aren't bringing anything to you. It's just saying, if you fail to avoid them, then when you're trying to avoid them, you're going to be miserable. So try and focus on the stuff that you can actively avoid, I guess, and not stuff that's out of your control, which again is following that similar kind of theme. So, I suppose like an example of something sounds more trivial, but you want to avoid being overweight, right? So you could actively control your diet and exercise to control that if you wish, right? But if you want to avoid something that's out of your control, you might just be miserable thinking about it. There's nothing you can do about it, right? So he uses in the text an example like, if I want to avoid death, but no one can avoid death, so why worry about it, right?
Yeah, if you let that bother you, it's always going to bother you because you can't avoid it.
Yeah. So I know that's how I was kind of thinking about it. But
a really simple way to say that would basically be don't live in fear of things that you can't control. Because by definition, you can't control it. So you'd be forced to live in fear.
Yeah.
That's correct. It also mentions nature, and I think that's a common theme throughout here too. So he's saying, where is it here? If then you try to avoid only what is unnatural in the region within your control, you will escape from all that you avoid. So, I mean, is there things that are natural in the region within your control that you can't escape? Is that what he's saying?
Well, he's citing, disease, death, or poverty.
Yeah.
Could that hark back to what we read at the end of the Republic, where everything has something unique to itself that destroys it?
Yeah.
And that thing which destroys something is unique to its nature. Is that perhaps an angle?
I don't know. Yeah, I read that part a few times, and I was a little bit confused by it. Like, I understand the if you try to avoid, death and taxes, then you're not going to do well. Yeah. But it feels like he's just saying if it's something you can control, if it's within your power and it's unnatural, then sort it out.
Yeah, I suppose maybe he's saying like man-made rather than like a naturally occurring symptom of life, right?
Actually, I think I get it. So, because later he keeps talking about being in harmony with nature. So maybe what he's saying is if there's something that you can influence, but its current state is in alignment with nature, then you probably shouldn't screw around with that thing, because you want to be in harmony with nature. So it's only things that aren't in harmony with nature that are within your control that you should focus on. That might be what he's saying.
I think so. I remember later on in one of the other points, there's a discussion on the nature of the thing. I've got some notes on that, so I might leave off on that until we get up to it. Maybe retrospectively it could make some sense of it.
That's the most that's made sense to me so far.
Nice.
That part.
I think he sort of moves on from there, then like focusing on the will to get rather than the will to avoid. Again, I think that's that sort of lesson on jealousy. If you will to get things that are out of reach honorably, he's sort of saying is that you're going to be unhappy, bound to be unfortunate. I think is the words that he sort of put in there. And he's just really just saying, he's suggesting really to like remove the will to get altogether, really, and just focus your efforts on acting and having purpose, I suppose. So I think what he's saying is like just do what's right, focus on what you can control, and you'll sort of like naturally get what you deserve, I suppose. No more or no less, but you should be happy with what you get. I think is what he's kind of saying. Like, if you're trying to reach for something that you're never going to get, you're
right.
going to be unhappy.
Because if you're trying to get something and you don't get it, you're unfortunate. You know, it's kind of like sucks, but you know, you didn't make it. But if you try to escape what he wills to avoid, you're going to be miserable. So if you try to escape what you haven't got control of, you're going to be miserable either way. But if you fail to get what you want to get, you know, it's unfortunate, but you're just not going to make you miserable.
So a ridiculous example would be, you know, I want to fly to another solar system and see another planet. So he's saying, like, if you pursue that, you're not going to succeed because it's out of reach. So don't pursue something unrealistic.
If you have anxiety about but if you want to get to that other planet because you think Earth is going to get hit by a comet and you can't avoid that, and you let that eat you up, you're going to be miserable because you think that there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Is that what you mean?
I think Tim was on the other side on the will bit, but
yeah. So I was looking at the will bit, like you're working towards a goal that is never going to be achievable. Therefore, you'll be disappointed.
Well, I think this is actually something that's like quite common in the modern age, like particularly just with like people really hung up on consumerism and social media. You've got a lot of people on there who like to sort of show off their wealth, their holidays, their new Ferrari, etc., etc. And they're feeding this appetite for acquisition of things that are out of reach of most people. And I know there's a lot of people who are miserable looking on social media, looking at other people's, we'll call them lives in inverted commas. That's this kind of thing, I think, like this wanting this life that maybe you're not going to be able to have. Which, I mean, it's fake anyway, but, you know, that's what's presented in front of you. You know, why do you do it to yourself? Why do you do it to your family? And I think he's trying to challenge you on, you know, what's really important, you know, just focus on those things that you should be doing and, you know, you'll get what maybe you should be entitled to or whatever. Maybe not what you're thinking of, but what's good for you. I mean, there's that financial, you know, speaker or author, I suppose. I quite like the Barefoot Investor. You guys probably heard of him, but he always talks about people burdening themselves in debt, you know, to get the bigger house, the fancier cars with a view to happiness. He calls them the plastic rich. So not really wealthy, but just giving the impression of wealth, but being massively burdened in debt, thirst for consumer goods. So I think he's just saying there's something to be said for being restrained and simple and not getting hung up on chasing down ridiculous kind of stuff. I don't know. A bit more Socrates, you know, barefoot and waiting at the buffet. But yeah. But still happy and healthy in his mind and, you know, with his purpose and all that sort of thing.
Interesting.
Okay, well, let's jump to part 3. Part 3. When anything from the meanest thing upwards is attractive or serviceable or an object of affection, remember always to say to yourself, what is its nature? If you are fond of a jug, say you are fond of a jug. Then you will not be disturbed if it be broken. If you kiss your child or your wife, say to yourself that you are kissing a human being, for then if death strikes it, you will not be disturbed. So part 3, I found this part a little bit, come on man, you know, I was on board with the jugs, and then when we got to the as most men are, but once you get to the tail of this paragraph, I was like, that's a bridge too far for me, I think.
Yeah, totally.
I found this bit really interesting, and I don't think I would have understood it at all if we hadn't read the Republic first.
Okay, so let's focus on the jugs first. So,
but I think I agree with you. The bridge too far bit. We'll cross that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Okay. Hang on. Let me find a example that's sitting here on my collectibles. All right. Let's say it's this Destiny 2 handgun replica that I have. So while we have this thing, this is an object of affection, and I must ask myself, what is its nature? So if I am fond of a replica handgun, then I am to say I am fond of a replica handgun, as opposed to I am fond of this particular replica handgun. That's my reading of it. So then, if I drop this particular replica handgun, I will not be upset because I'm not fond of this particular replica handgun, but I am fond of just replica handguns in general, and there's other ones.
Should we get Charlie to come in and break it and test that theory?
So, out comes this replica of the Duke handgun instead, because, why not? I have another one. And if I break that one too, I can always order one off the interwebs. That's my take of what he's saying. Do you guys agree?
I think he was saying that, look, if it's something that's not of high consequence, it's just a material object, right? So, yes, you might like it, but it's not going to kill you. So suck it up and get over it.
I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he starts I think he starts with something of low consequence to get people to agree with the idea.
I agree with
that. And then he goes, all right, now apply this principle to your child or your wife. And I'm like, what?
Because they're just jugs?
So it's like, you won't be disturbed. If you kiss your child or your wife, say to yourself that you are kissing a human being. For then, if death strikes it, if death strikes it, you will not be disturbed. You will not be disturbed. Okay. Yeah. My child and wife has died. I am not disturbed because I can go and kiss someone else. It's weird.
I didn't take it as that. I kind of took that more about that whole natural order thing. That death's a part of life. And again, it's not something that can be avoided. It's a natural consequence. So why are you getting upset about it? I don't necessarily agree with this, by the way. I'm just saying, that's how I was sort of thinking about it.
I've never seen this work. I've never seen someone have someone that close die and just go, meh, there's someone else I can kiss. Perhaps someone truly, who we would consider to be truly corrupted or evil, might behave this way. I mean, this is often the thing portrayed in movies as the ultimate villain. Someone who doesn't care about that person's close to him's fate.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to be a robot if you were not a villain or a sociopath, right? I don't know that you'd want to compartmentalize to such a level that you could park that. I mean, it might be handy to be able to park that when you need to be a functioning person, and maybe going the full other end of the scale where you're a whimpering mess, wailing and not able to do anything. So that's end of the scale is no good. Maybe, in my opinion, this end of the scale that he's describing is probably no good. Somewhere in the middle is a workable, functioning human. I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is by disturbed he means broken. Because I recall reading something from Seneca where he was addressing this issue about grief, and his point was that a Stoic can feel loss and grief, but that it should be not in excess. So not in such a way that you flail around for months on end and become completely useless to everything and everyone because you're so broken that it's conquered you. I wonder if that's sort of what he's saying, but on first read, this passage I was like, what is this?
But I mean, they certainly tackled that aspect of grief in the Republic, though, as well, if you remember. and they were saying how I think they were talking about like the epic stories and how somebody lost their wife in the story, and they're flailing around screaming, why to the gods, and carrying on crying, and I think that they described it as womanish or something. I remember we were kind of like laughing at the descriptor or something like that. And so look, I think it's certainly it's a concept they've been sort of talking about there, as far as it's just a impractical way of being. And I think death was a more common occurrence back then than what we're accustomed to now. So I'm not saying like life was cheaper, but I think it was more fragile there and more susceptible to being, sand through the fingers, so to speak. But anyway, Rubes has been sitting there quietly. He had some thoughts. I'm keen to hear him. He's letting us ramble and dig deeper before he's going to come into the shadows.
No, it's probably not. No, but just off the back of what you just said then about life probably being a little bit cheaper back then, I think there was also that sense of ownership too. Like you could own a human life, you could own a slave. So I think that's probably why he's a little bit more comfortable in using an analogy of a jug and then sliding, like, a possession, and then sliding from that to a wife and child. But I think that might be why he's so comfortable in doing that. But so this is my read on this section, right? So he starts by saying, if you have an affection for something, ask, what is its nature? Now, I think when he's saying, what is its nature, I think that's a really Socratic or Platonic way to look at it. Because if you remember back to the cave, Socrates is like, go outside the cave and see what the actual truth of a thing is. So when I think he says about the nature of a thing, I think that's basically what he's asking you to do. To look at something and go, well, what is it that is the truth of this thing? What is the nature of this thing that I'm attracted to? The idea being that that's the higher order good, and that's the ultimate thing. And then I think where the disconnect is for me is, so I guess what he's saying is like, what is it about? He talks about a jug. So let's put the jug aside and talk about, say, the child. So I think what he's asking the reader to do is to say, well, what is it that you love about a child? And I think he wants you to go super abstract and go outside the cave and go, well, what is love and what is life? And and that sort of stuff, and thereby kind of disconnect you from the particular. I think Tim was right in the idea of, this is all about the particular thing, and then the form of that thing, or the universal of that thing. Because if you're attached to the universal, then that's a higher order attachment or a higher order truth. Whether you accept all that, I don't know whether you accept that or not, or whether that's necessarily a good idea in practicality. But where I think the disconnect for people like us these days, or where I actually think that the logical disconnect is in the value of a thing. So, yeah, sure, you can abstract something and you can get to the truth of what it is you really like about a thing. But the value of a thing, I think, is attached to the particularity of it. So you think about a rare car, you know what I mean? There's 100 Corollas out there, but there's only one Ferrari GTO. So is it because it's a Ferrari that it's more valuable, or is it because there's only a couple of them? And then you can sort of then if you take that a step further to a human relationship, a relationship that you have with another individual, like a child or a wife or a friend or whatever, is the ultimate particular, because it's a relationship between you and someone else. So nobody else has that exact same relationship. So that becomes even more precious. So I think that's where it disconnects. I think that's where, how Tim, you were saying, that's a bridge too far, I can't go there.
Yeah.
I actually think that's why you can't. Because, yeah, sure, you can abstract that all you want. But when somebody that you know and love dies, that's a particular relationship that's unique to you that nobody else can share in. And I think that's why it becomes so valuable to someone. So that was my thought process on that bit. And look, I tend to agree, broadly speaking, how we were talking about, you got to let things go, and like you can't be too upset about things, and death is a part of existence and all that sort of gear. But I think that's where I disagree with this particular section. I don't know, what do you guys reckon?
Look, I think that's a really interesting way that you put it, because I wasn't getting there. So I like your description. I don't know if that's what his intention is. I'd be really curious actually to try and track down the passage in the discourses and see
well,
what
I think that was, like I said, that was my read on it. When he says, "What is the nature of a thing?" I thought he meant, "What is the form of it?" And then straight away I was like, "Oh, he's talking about the particular versus the universal."
Yeah.
And then going to that whole Platonic idea of, well, the universal is the absolute truth, whereas your particulars are somehow less valuable.
Yeah.
The particulars are back in the cave, so to speak.
I think
for sure.
I think you're right, but when I thought about the nature of a child or a woman or a man, we're not immortal, so it's natural for us to die. So I thought that's sort of what he was indicating in regards to its nature. Like, its nature is to not live forever.
Yeah.
So that came to mind for me.
And that's out of your control.
Yeah. Therefore, don't worry about it.
That's the same way I looked at it, Tim. Yeah.
But I like what Ruben said, and it makes sense too. So I'm not sure. Maybe both are true. Maybe one. Maybe neither. Don't know.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what he would have thought about the example Rubes is giving around, that specific relationship, and whether that is something that he's arguing you still should be able to park, or he's saying, no, that's deep enough that, that's going to be harder to deal with or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if I'm right, then his path towards that would be like, I have a relationship with this particular person. What is it I like about having a relationship? And he would then go from there, well, what is a relationship? And then he'd be like, and he would keep abstracting until he got to this pure idea of what it is about a relationship like. So if you use cars, it'd be like, well, what do you like? You like cars, right? What do you like about cars? Is it the engineering? Is it the aesthetic? Is it the freedom that is attached to having a car and driving it?
Yeah.
And then he would abstract to those things. You go all the way up to the top, and he'd be like, well, if the thing that you like about cars is, let's say, the aesthetic, well, you can find the aesthetic in other things.
Yeah. So you're saying
the abstraction
technique to actually overcome the issue is to make the thing that is personal so abstract that it becomes less personal. Maybe
that's wrong. I think I think in a sort of a moderate approach. Think about, you guys love cars. You might have 3 cars, and then you might enjoy a car for a while, and then you sell it and you buy another one. I know you do that, Lachlan. That's like your jam. Yeah. So would he look at that and he'd be like, oh, that's because you've abstracted your love of cars to something higher, which means you're not as attached to that particular. So you're happy to enjoy that particular for a while. And then if you crash it or you sell it, you can move on to another one, because it's not that particular car you're in love with. You're in love with cars, or the idea of cars, or the engineering, or the aesthetic of cars.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't think that it doesn't feel right applying that to a person.
No.
It feels okay to apply it to a jug, not to a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think it could also be saying, like, some people, when their partner dies, they're like, love has died, they go to that sort of extreme. Do you think it's also a bit of that?
Oh, right? like if you get like someone who's young and they get dumped and they're like, I'm never gonna love again. Yeah,
it's the death of love, not the death of.
That is someone you could sit down and say, well, what is love? Like, can you find it somewhere else? Like, and that sort of stuff. Yeah, exactly. Okay, all right.
But it's like, I don't know if you guys know, but like, in older sort of Greek communities and stuff, and I don't know if they still do it to this day. I'm sure there'd still be people who would do this to this day. It's like when your husband dies, the widow will wear black for the rest of their life. Will never won't remarry, won't love again, and in that way. So maybe there could have been a different mindset at that time too. I don't know.
Good point. Well, I think we move to part 4, and then we'll finish with part 4 for tonight. But I just don't want to finish on the wife and child death. I feel like that's a bit too much of a downer.
Absolutely.
So part 4. Part 4. When you are about to take something in hand, remind yourself what manner of thing it is. If you are going to bathe, put before your mind what happens in the bath. Water pouring over some, others being jostled, some revelling, others stealing. And you will set to work more securely if you say to yourself at once, I want to bathe, and I want to keep my will in harmony with nature. And so in each thing you do, for in this way, if anything turns up to hinder you in your bathing, you will be ready to say, I did not want only to bathe, but to keep my will in harmony with nature, and I shall not so keep it if I lose my temper at what happens. So again, it's this idea, when you take something in hand, remind yourself what manner of thing it is. And it goes into this bath analogy, and I discussed this with my son tonight, and I used the analogy of playing Xbox. So would you like to hear that?
Sure, lay it on me.
Okay, so the analogy I had was, let's say, son, that you want to play Xbox. So you walk into the lounge room, you turn on the Xbox, you go to play your game, and there's no internet. Right, so that would make you upset and angry and make your day yuck. But what he's saying here in this passage is, instead of saying, I'm going to go and play the Xbox, you say, I'm going to go and play the Xbox, and I'm going to remain in harmony with nature. And then and the playing the Xbox is priority 2, and remaining in harmony with nature is priority 1. So then when you go to your Xbox and the internet doesn't work, you can still achieve your priority, your number one goal, by not losing your temper at that, and by staying in control. Because you're like, well, that's outside of my control that the internet's gone down, because nature has made a tree fall on a telephone line somewhere, and I have no internet anymore. So that's the nature of the world. Things go wrong, but I can achieve my priority, which is not getting frustrated by that, not losing my temper at that. So that was the analogy I gave him, like, to try and explain this idea to him. How do you think that went? Do you think that's close to the money, or what are your thoughts?
I think you did pretty good with that one. I had some similar kind of notes. I must admit, I actually had a look at another translation of this, because just because of some of the language used in there, and it just helped to clarify a little bit for me. But I think you nailed that pretty well.
Oh, man. What are your thoughts there, Ruben?
Yeah, I'd go with that. I sort of read this one. I glossed over this one. I didn't give it too much thought. I think that's about right.
Something's gone horribly wrong. If I've nailed it first try, something's gone horribly wrong. Oh wow, we just had a massive lag spike for those watching and / listening. Just going to pause for a moment. And we're back after a little technical difficulty. So I was just saying, something must have gone horribly wrong if we got that right first time, and then this thing crashed. So it did go horribly wrong. Anyway, so yes, I think that one's nailed. And
Yeah.
the next one is too big to get into when we're this far into the show. So I think we wrap it up there for this week. And we can come back to part 5 next week. So I think we're having latency issues again.
Well, it's no
Yep.
it's no republic, but we aimed for 10 and we only get 5. So
True to form.
we've been here before.
True to form. I think we actually got through 4. We're up to 5, but we did have a really good introduction at the beginning. So I think we should be able to get a little bit more done next week. But who knows? Who knows? All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. And for those listening, the Republic wasn't built in a day, and neither are middle-aged men. And this book is looking good. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.
There you go.